Well, this episode is a treat. Somewhere along the line, I remember I used to be really intimidated by him, and now the greatest coach of all time, in my opinion, in all of sports, is my buddy. Scotty Bowman joins me. Scotty, as I start every show, how does the legend that you are, how do you define Scotty baby digging in?
Well, I mean, I got invited by you, so I've been on some Zoom calls, and I do like technology, so I'm pretty happy to be able to talk to you a little bit at the present time because we have lots of time.
Okay, but to ask you, as a coach in life, if somebody is digging in and doing it appropriately, what are they doing?
You mean interviewing me?
No, digging in.
Digging in. That's the name of your thing. Well, digging in, I guess I used my old philosophy when I wasn't big on the post game. I didn't have to do as many as they do now. But when they would ask me a question about what happened to the defense or the goaltending or the penalty kill, whatever it might be, I would start talking about the power play or something else. And they didn't bug you. I mean, I said, well, but talk about our goaltending. Well, our defense is sort of, I don't know, we got to improve that. And I get on another subject, but I won't do that with you.
Otherwise, I'll accuse you of having ADD. Hey, during this COVID lockdown, because boy, whatever level of analyst I am, you've made me so much better with what you've taught me on a weekly, monthly, and yearly basis in our talks. You went back and watched all the games from the 60s on. Tell me about that and what your biggest takeaways were watching all of that film.
Well, it's so much different, Tripp. The games, I don't know the length of the games, but it seemed to me that there was a lot less time now between whistles. When the play stopped, whatever they've done to really speed it up, there's no fooling around. I mean, in those years, in the playoffs, of course, you could stall around, and I was anxious to see who I would be putting on the ice with a couple of minutes to go, and then the next thing you know, there's the delay. You could call the referee over. You could do it. It seemed to be about twice as long between stoppages before the puck got dropped again. Nobody was in a hurry. I don't know if there was fewer whistles. I maybe there was. I don't think so because there was offsides. There was 2 line passes, but and you look at the games now, and I think it was easier then it seemed to be easier to pick out the stars. I mean, I know it was most of the ones I was watching was in the finals, so obviously you got a lot of top players, but I know in particular I was watching the Pittsburgh game against Chicago, and I mean, you could tell it wasn't very hard to tell how good Mario was in the crunch time, and I don't know now if it's the same because, the game is so much faster, and it's, I don't say I think it was rougher in the days that when I was watching in the 80s and 90s. It seemed to be, there was a lot more body contact because there wasn't as much speed, and you could pick players off a little bit easier. And of course, they've changed a lot of the rules. They're not the headshots and hits from behind and all that they're past history. So there was I thought it was quite a bit rougher. I know it was in the finals, but still, it didn't seem to be a lot of penalties called as they would be now.
I know one thing that jumped out at me during one of our daily conversations, the Cups you won with Montreal, and I'm in Detroit at the moment, and you saw some similarities that hadn't previously popped out to you in some similarities between Serge Savard and Nicklas Lidstrom. Tell me about those. Well,
they're players that you can't find very often, but when it seemed that they were mistake free. That was the first thing I noticed. When they got the puck, usually their own team kept it. Whatever play they decided to make, whether they were going D to D or they were exiting the puck out into the neutral zone. So it seemed that you look at Serge Savard, and we did have Larry Robinson and Guy Lapointe. We had 3 Hall of Fame defensemen on the same team. and later on we had Rod Langway, but he was just starting. So you can really see that the possession type of the game that they played was so important because the plays they made, and with Lidstrom, of course, every time he got the puck, we did track it a little bit with analytics. We didn't have analytics like they have now, but we were trying to do comparisons between how his game was with other defensemen that we had, and he was always in the 90s. Like when he would get the puck, unless we were killing a penalty, of course, he'd throw it ice down the rink. But when he got the puck, the next play we still had the puck, and I think that's when you look at puck possession. And when you have Hall of Fame players, obviously they're good with the puck, and you're not chasing the puck all the time. So I've been a big. I've had different kind of teams. My first break in the NHL, going to St. Louis, was different because at that time we with that expansion, we got about 3 or 4 like real bona fide players that had been in the NHL the previous season, and then all the rest of the roster was some good players because there was only 6 teams in the league. But we had the players in the minors that we got. They just didn't score in the NHL, but they were good players, but they could play defensively. And so my team in St. Louis that I had, we ended up getting 4 Hall of Fame players, but they were on the back ends of their career. Jacques Plante, Glenn Hall, Doug Harvey, Dickie Moore, and some of them were just coming back out of retirement. But they knew how to defend, and sort of taught the players that we had, getting some good minor leaguers. They were good defensively. So we played a stingy type of game. We didn't play a puck possession game, though. We were more or less back all the time and always covering the ice as much as we could defensively because we're playing against the East Division, especially during the games we played. I think with the first year we only played a home and home, but the next year we played 2 home and 2 away, and they were tough games because you got 3 or 4 National Hockey League players. You got some that are going to be players eventually, and you got most of the other ones were players that couldn't make the NHL. But hey, it was only 120 players in the league, so when you do comparisons now, there's 700.
Okay, so in St. Louis, you took me there. The genius and the method with some personality to it. Tell me the story there where you employed a curfew, and the way you did it is you took a stick down to the bellman at the. I need you to tell that story because that one still blows me away.
Well, it was the 3rd year of the Blues. We got to the finals again that year, but we had a solid team. We led the West for 3 straight years with good defense mainly, and with great goaltending, of course, with Glenn Hall, and then later on with Jacques Plante and Glenn Hall. So we were in a little mini slump in November. We went into Detroit. We were into Detroit. We'd lost about 3 in a row, and the Red Wings were not a real strong team. We were stronger than them. We got beat badly one night, and we, for some reason, we always ended up with a trail of players that had been through the Montreal system. Either they were excess players. We had a lot of players that played with Canadians: Ab McDonald, Jim Roberts. Players that were in the farm system, Red Berenson, the Plaguers, Barclay Plager rather. So we had a bad game in Detroit, and we were taking the train to Montreal. It was on Thursday night, and we're playing Saturday night in Montreal, and we didn't do very well in Montreal. Montreal, they were always up for us, and we couldn't seem to do much. So we decided to take the train from Detroit on the Friday. So Thursday night, 2 nights before the game, and we had the bad game on Thursday, and it's 2 nights before the next game in Montreal. And we never had curfew in those days, mainly the night before the game, and you're not checking it much. But this time, I just said, look, we want to play a good game in Montreal. I'd like to put a midnight curfew. I said, right after the game, I was upset with the game, but I didn't show it. I said, but I'm gonna be checking too. So I never checked rooms as a coach, and I wouldn't even know how to even start it. So I somehow I read about it in baseball. Somebody took a baseball bat, a manager. So I took a stick back because we never traveled by bus. We always traveled by taxi. And the coaches, of course, there's only one coach. Sometimes you'd bunk in with the trainer, but I left the game with a stick in my hand, and I had this idea, and I knew the bell captain, and I also emphasized the players that I would be checking. Well, they probably wondered checking. We never were checking in those days. So I knew the bell captain, and I said to him, I said, I got some players coming in here, up to midnight, maybe a bit later. I said, could you get this stick signed? I need to get some autographs for I don't know if I said it was for some charity or something. So I said, but I'm going to look after you. I said, don't worry about it. So sure enough, I mean, they came in, and he got the players. He got 6 players to sign the stick that came in after 12. In fact, I think the last one was a little bit after 1, and he even put the time down. So I picked up the stick. The next day it was at the bell captain's desk, and we knew because we stayed at the same hotel all the time. And I got a hold of the stick, and I gave the guy $60. I told the guys that I'd get $10 an autograph. I took the stick back to the room, practice before we get on the train. And I had the stick in front of me, and I had the names like down on the stick. And I said, guys, we had an awful game last night, but I said, I got some good autographs here. And they were looking, and I said, I got some here, 110, 120. I said, we had a 12 o'clock curfew, but so I said, you know what? I said, I'm going to turn this $60 into $600. So I said, I paid $10, but I need $100 from each of you. Well, we didn't have any fines in those days. You took the money and you gave it in for an after the season party, or it was a Halloween or whatever it would be. So anyways, I had an assistant that was just up that year, played the whole year, Doug Harvey. He was a playing assistant, and he was quite a guy because he said, Coach, you got him pretty good. You should make it 200. And he was one of the players, but he wasn't one of the guys. I mean, he had straightened his own case out by then. So I said, no, we'll just get $100. So that was the story.
I can't help but think, because I was in the same position that I am now with the Hurricanes when they played your last of your Stanley Cup teams in Detroit in 2002. To be honest with you, partner, I was intimidated to talk to the great Scotty Bowman. So now that we've become great friends, I had no clue that you have and had the great sense of humor you do. My question is, did you let your players, Montreal, St. Louis, Montreal, Pittsburgh, Detroit, did you let them see your sense of humor or no?
Well, I mean, it was different in those days, especially going into Montreal after St. Louis. I had a different type of team, and they had won the cup. I think they had won the cup the year before. They missed the 69-70 season. They missed the playoffs, actually. But if you look through the way that the cups they had won, I got there in 71, and that was the year after, just the year following Ken Dryden's baptismal in the NHL. So, and the Canadiens were rebuilding. I got there, signed a contract for 1 year, and the next day they had the draft, and they had number 1 pick they got from Oakland. They drafted Guy Lafleur, and the manager of the team, Sam Pollock, he had he always had a lot of vision, and he had a leg up on a lot of teams because he went to a lot of the Board of Governor meetings, got to know some of the teams and some of the owners, and the expansion teams were getting a little impatient. We started off in 67. We didn't have a very good entry draft because the good players were already listed on sponsored teams. So we went through some tough times on the West Division. No good amateur drafts in 67 or 68. And 2 years in a row, and you only got 20 pros. So anyway, Sam Pollock was able to maneuver around. Montreal always they always seemed to have an excess of players, and he used to loan players and trade them to other teams, get draft picks. You could get draft picks in those days because the West Division, the expansion, they were anxious to get going, and they couldn't wait for a kid you're going to draft in 69 and maybe he's not going to play for a year or two. So he made trades, and Sam Pollock got first round picks, and they weren't like just first round picks. They were first pick overall, and then The next year, Steve Shutt was a third pick overall. I don't know, another trade he made with another team. So they had a lot of good young players coming out of the draft and getting to Montreal, and they had won the cup the year before I got there. So I had to play a different style, and I was a stickler for good practices. I really enjoyed practices, and I think they expected it. I mean, you kind of lay off if you're going good, but when things were getting a little tight, I never let them think what we're going to have a long practice or a short practice. But I think players like to be pushed. I know I was a big practice coach. I learned that from the man that taught me an awful lot, the late Toe Blake, because he was a stickler too. He had played in the NHL. He was a Hall of Fame player, and he said, in those days, if you don't practice well, you're not going to play well. And that was ingrained in me as a young coach. And I right to my last years with the league, I thought practices were the real. Not long ones. I never had long practices. I believed in short, quick, a lot of drills. I was a big supporter of the Soviet system because I saw what they did with their players, and they that's one thing that they did too. They maybe overdid a little bit because they had an advantage with the communism in Russia, but I believed in practices.
It's amazing because to this day, Scotty, how close I am with the Hurricanes' current coach, Rod Brindamore. And he'll always ask me, ask Scotty this, ask Scotty that. He's afraid to ask you himself. What percentage of every practice would you devote to your power play and special teams?
Always. I never had a team that I coached that I didn't practice the power play. And, I learned very early, you're only going to get about 10 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes maximum, and then it kind of drops off. But I felt that you had to really do you had to kill penalties and do power play at the same time. And I used to match up the real offensive players on the power play. I think it made them better. The penalty killing players, I could go back to Montreal. We were fortunate. You had guys like Guy Lafleur on the power play. Bob Gainey was the best defensive player I think I ever had, and he would be killing the penalties. And I know that players get better, and that's why if you can get a couple of players, 2 or 3 that are above average, and maybe even a lot better than some you have on your team, you'll find out that the more you practice with those good players, it sort of spins off on the other guys, and it makes regular players better, and I've always believed that.
I see you wearing, on the Zoom portion, this is just an audio podcast that will air, but I see you wearing your Hall of Fame hat. A couple years ago, when my owner at the time, Pete Carmanis, went into the Hall of Fame, I watched you, and Mike Ilitch was still alive, and Mike and Marian Ilitch were sitting right by me, and the embrace that you had with them, I'll never forget it. Of all your stops in wonderful cities, unbelievable hockey cities, what was it that was unique and special about Detroit and the Ilitches?
Well, I left Pittsburgh in a bit of not a little bit. It was a disagreement over something that happened with my contract. So Detroit came with a big offer. And I wasn't really looking to leave, except I knew they were a pretty decent team. I got a call from Jim Devellano, the executive vice president, and he said, Mike Ilitch and Marian want to meet with you. And they actually came to Buffalo in late June one year, picked my family up and brought me down to Florida. They had a condo on the eastern side of the coast, and we as soon as I got there and they started talking hockey, and I never had to sign a contract with these people. And I told them, I said, I don't have a lot left, but I want to stay a couple of years, and I'm more interested in what I do after I finish coaching. And they said, well, that's fine. You don't have to worry. You can stay with us as long as I was only going to go there and coach the first 2 seasons, and I ended up coaching 9. So I liked the the atmosphere, the family atmosphere they created with a team. They were always helping the players on different things, even outside of the game. They had a big family themselves, and they were very philanthropic. They were always helping people, and I just love going to work with these people. And then of course when I left, it was a tough decision because my son had got the Stan in Chicago. Had just started. He was now moved up to Dale Talon, was the manager, and he was his assistant. And anyways, he unfortunately got Hodgkin's disease in 2008. He was only 34, and Dale Talon called Detroit and asked for permission to speak to me and wanted to know if I could. They were looking for somebody just to be a senior advisor, and it was a tough call because I felt I was going to be in Detroit the rest of my career. I wasn't coaching by then. I'd been a consultant for about 3 or 4 years. So I first call I made was to Mike Ilitch, and I said, Mike, I got an opportunity that I've got mixed feelings about having to leave. And he said, it's a no-brainer, Scotty. You got to think of your family first. They said, you'll always be high in our regard, but I don't think you have to go. And I know he'd love to keep you here, but you got to go there. So it was the best thing that Dale ever did for me. He put me in a position to help him off ice, my son. And he had a tough time. He came back in 6 months, and then he did a stem cell. But I got along well with Chicago. I still have a lot of good feelings. Every team I was with, but especially Detroit, because Jim DeVillano brought me to Detroit. They were making a coaching change, and then that's when I got to meet Ken Holland, who just got nominated as a builder for the Hall of Fame, and it was a real family atmosphere. We had Jim Nill, who was a great manager in Dallas. Everybody pulled on the same rope. We had a scout. So I just people were working in Detroit, but it didn't feel like work. It just felt like we're just one happy. I mean, of course, the team was good, and the owner wanted to win at all costs, and I appreciated my time there, and I think about the tough times they're having now. But I've been through that myself, but I was lucky that Dale Talon gave me the call to go to Chicago.
And thankfully, for a long time now, your son Stan is valiantly beat cancer. He's cancer-free. It led to 3 cups with the Hawks. I want to ask you a couple of questions, partner, about Detroit. So I remember you telling me stories because, for a portion, you wore the general manager's cap and with the Red Wings as well as being the head coach. Told me about acquiring Slava Fetisov, how that changed things, Igor Larionov. If you had to pick one decision, whether it be off the ice, an adjustment, behind the bench, that you're most proud of during your tenure, and of course 3 Stanley Cups included with the Red Wings, what would it be?
Well, I think it was the fact that we had a strong team. I think looking back on all the changes that we made, we had an owner that was going to spend money on free agents, but we also got lucky in a couple of deals. We got Kurt Maltby and we got Larry Murphy, players that were on the back end of Maltby hadn't even been in the league when we got him. And I think when I look back at the Red Wings, the deal that we got Igor Larionov, that started us because it finally gave us a 5th Russian. And we when I got there, Sergei Fedorov and Vladimir Konstantinov were established players that were in their 2nd year, I think, when I got there. And then Slava Kozlov was a rookie, but he was another Soviet draft pick. These guys were all drafted very, very similar to situations where teams weren't drafting Russian players at that time because the feeling was it's a loss of a draft pick. They're not coming. But all of a sudden it opened up, and who do you know, they had to smuggle a lot of them out. I mean, I didn't even realize until I saw the movie recently, The Russian Five, the work that Jim DeVillano, Nick Polano, Even the Jimmy Lights, who's with Dallas now, they did an awful job getting these players out. But getting Igor was the final push to get the fifth Russian. And while other players were so important on the team, that Russian five gave us a different kind of a look. And I think it spilled off on the team. They played a puck possession game. And, it's so important now when you get the puck and you don't give it away and you don't make the wrong plays. But you have to have skill. You can't play with the puck if you don't have skill. But I would say getting Igor Larionov, because we were already strong in the middle. We had Steve Yzerman and Sergei Fedorov, and we had Chris Draper. We were good down the middle, and then good enough that we could move Steve Yzerman towards the end of his career. He agreed to go and play left wing, and we were able in playoffs to put he up there with Sergei and Brendan Shanahan. It was a powerful line for us my last couple of years in the playoffs. But I think getting the Russians to play, and also I didn't play them all the time. I was always fearful because they were such a different style. I was always wondering, and I had no idea. I mean, I used to kid them a lot because Slava Fetisov was quite a guy, and he'd come in and start asking questions. And I said, wait a minute, Slava, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I don't know what you're doing, but and they were wonderful guys because we had three young players, Konstantinov, Kozlov, Fedorov, but we had the two veterans. And I think it really made our team a different kind of team. But I was careful that I didn't want to just think that it was a Russian team that was dominating everything. And so I didn't play them all the time. I was very careful. I thought teams would be able to figure them out. And they accepted it. And when they didn't play together, they played with other players.
That first time that you put them together on the road in Calgary, was that something that you had thought about for a period of time, or did it just come to you in that small coach's room before the game? What was the whole genesis of that?
We had just got Slava Fetisov, and we had four, and we had a lot of right wingers on our team that era. We had Ray Shepard, we had Dino Cicerelli, we had Marty Lapointe. We had a lot. We were very strong on the right side, and when we got beat the first year I coached in Detroit because of Larionov. I mean, he formed a 5-man unit with San Jose. He had one other Russian with him, Sergei Makarov. He had a Swedish player, Johan Garpenloff, and then he had I think he had a player. He had Sandis Oza-Lynch. He wasn't. He was from one of the countries near Russia, and he had Jeff Norton. And those 5 guys played a 5-man unit, and they beat us. They beat us in a playoff series. My first year in Detroit, it's a big upset, and the San Jose beat us in the 7th game. And but Larionov was the key. So when I got a chance we had to trade a good player. He was in a 30-goal scorer, Ray Shepard, but we had enough right wingers. We didn't have to worry about replacing them because we had a lot of right wingers. And Igor came in, and I see now he's finally. I've always felt that somehow he should have been a coach. I mean, he that's the way he played, and now he's finally 60 years old, and he's gonna coach the Russian national team, the under 20. He finally, I think he sort of lives between Michigan and Russia, but he's quite a guy. He's on the selection committee with the Hall of Fame, and he's I mean, Tripp, he's regarded in Russia similar to the way we regarded Wayne Gretzky in Canada. I mean, that was a big comparable. They didn't play the same way, but he's just a wonderful person, and so cosmopolitan for a player from Russia.
And he scored, for all the great Hurricanes fans listening, partner, he scored a huge goal in overtime against the Canes in 2002. That was a good. So, what do you remember most about that series?
It was a lot closer than people have given credit for, because we lost the first game in Detroit. Ronnie Francis scored the overtime goal, and we were a powerhouse team during the season as well. And that goal that Larionov scored was an important goal because the series was 1-1. I always felt playing in Carolina with the crowd, and you always felt kind of crammed. You felt, I don't know for the reason, the rink was 200 by 85, but they were a tough team, and that game was because it was in the third overtime. I think when we scored, I think whoever scores that goal, it changes everything because it was way after 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning when that game ended, and then 2 days later, we had to play another game. So, that was an important game because it made the series 2-1. I mean, Carolina still had home ice. I mean, they won the first game. They only need to win the one in Detroit if they could win their home games. And that game had a big effect on game 4 because one team all thinking about how fortunate they were to win, and the other team is just saying, geez, if we could have won that game, we would still be ahead in the series. So I found goals were hard to come by in that series. Nobody scored, I don't think, more than even the game that Larionov scored. We were down. We were down at a couple of minutes to go when Brett Hull tipped the puck in. So when teams look back and you see a series of 5 games, they think it was pretty easy. It wasn't easy because even the last game in Detroit, where all the odds are for you when you're trying to win the cup at home, I mean, it's 2-1 game. It's a 1-goal game, and there's not a lot happening. But it was a closer series, and I look back when Carolina, beat a really good Toronto team. I mean, I was fearful of you're always fearful of every team thinking of going in the finals. But I know the Leafs, that was, if you look back on their last 2 decades, that's probably one of the better teams they had. And that was the 7th game, wasn't it, Tripp, that they lost?
Game 6 in Toronto, Marty Jelena. Yeah.
Yeah. But, and that was a tough series, but Arthur Zerbe was hot as a pistol right through that. Even in the final, he didn't give up many goals, really,
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Zerbe. He's another guy that beat us. When he was in San Jose, there's a goalie that didn't get a lot of credit for the way he played, but boy, could he stifle some offense. He really could.
And truthfully, don't let this go to your head, but Artur Zerbe, no ego, just like you. I really enjoyed his time as a Hurricane very, very much.
Is he a goalie coach somewhere?
He was for the Caps for a few years, and he might be back in Latvia now. I mean, just a sensational, salt of the earth guy. And Scotty is a small goalie that only backed up 1 game in the league because I became the great guesser. That series against Toronto, I admired how he always put himself in position to get hit and stayed on his feet against Curtis Joseph in that series. I want to ask you about your conference final because it was against your arch rival, the Colorado Avalanche. And a couple of stories that you've told me. Was it in the playoffs? What happened when, I don't know, for some reason you got a shorter bench than you deserved on the road in Colorado? What happened?
Yeah, they kind of got away with it a little bit. I knew Pierre Lacroix, the manager, and for some reason, the league thought it was trivial, but we were jammed up in Colorado. Well, first of all, they had a great 5-year span. When you look at Colorado, that team came from Quebec, and as soon as they made the deal to get Patrick Roy in the 96 season, 95-96, that was the player they needed, really. And to get a Hall of Fame Stanley Cup goalie in his prime, and that's what they did. And then when you think about the players they had, Peter Forsberg and Joe Sakic, and you look at we had Fedorov and Yzerman, and then you look at teams like Pittsburgh with Malkin and Crosby. And when you get Tucson, we had Pittsburgh, with Mario and Ronnie Francis and with Brian Trotzy backing them up. You get strength in the center ice position. and you're halfway there. I mean, it means so much. So I just thought that Colorado was a tough team to beat because of Patrick Roy. There's not many goalies. We were fortunate in Detroit because Mike Vernon is one of the few goalies that was able to go twice against Patrick and ended up eliminating his team, Patrick's team. And Patrick it's tough on a young goalie. When you're a young goalie and you go up and you're playing a possible 7-game series, and you're looking at that other end, and you're looking at a goalie that's won cups and played like he did. So that was a good rivalry for 5 years. But that bench, I called the league about it, and they kind of poo-pooed it. I said, well, except we can't get our next line. We can't get the players to sit. They always do have to sit in the second row. And I said, there's always players moving around. And it reminds me of a story I got to tell you. You might laugh at this one. But I still see him. I get along pretty good with my older players. But I get a big kick out of Stu Grimson, the Grim Reaper. And, we got him from Anaheim. We had a pretty good Detroit team. We didn't win with them, but we were kind of getting beat up a little bit. And I don't know, Kenny Holland was always on the market to get players that would fit in. So we picked up Stu one year, and we had a lot of good players. And he was there for a reason, that if the game got out of hand and players were taking advantage of ours, they're going to see Stu Grimson. So he was a big, strong guy, and he wanted to play, and he never complained, he never did anything to downsize the team, except he's standing in front of me one year. He's not. I was an important game or something. He's standing right in front of me on the bench, and he's exercising himself. And I'm moving around trying to find a spot to watch, and then finally I had enough, and now he's doing some stretching. And I said, Stu, please do me a favor. Please move to the back row, because you're not getting on the ice tonight. I said, we're ahead in the game. The game was quiet. I said, Stu, do me a favor. In the back, I have to see the game. But anyways, the bench. So, no, the league didn't want to hear about it. So I said, okay. We took a smaller bench, and I'm not sure what we did. Somebody figured it out. I think it was Paul Boyer, our equipment guy. He said, well, what we'll do? We'll take 2 short benches, and we'll get rid of the one that's not long enough. And we took 2 short benches, and we didn't leave it there between periods because we figured somebody would come and steal it. And it looks so funny because every period, as we go off the ice, out slides the bench is sliding with us. But that rivalry was as tough as you're going to get. I mean, it got down. If we played each other, whoever was going to knock the other team out was going to win the cup. And that happened about 4 years in a row. And they won in '96, and they came back and won with Ray Bourque in 2001. But that dynasty. It was for real, because there wasn't a lot of really aggressive players on both teams. I mean, they were really good players, Hall of Fame type players, but they battled. I mean, the goalies battled. I'm sure they had a great Russian player, Valery Kamensky, and they were a tough out for us to even try to beat them a couple of times.
He's now back in Detroit, but because you're always at games in Tampa, and Steve Yzerman, of course, was their general manager for several years, and seeing the two of you together, Scotty, it's well documented that you took him from being a prolific scorer to being the consummate all-star two-way centerman. What was that like? How did you deliver the message, make it so powerful, and turns into 3 Stanley Cups?
Well, Steve was captain of the team for 10 years prior to when I got there in '93. he'd been the captain, and they were close. I mean, they were a really good regular season team, but they got in the playoffs, and they were an offensive team. They could score goals. There was no problem. There was no problem scoring goals. There was a problem stopping the opposition. And when I got there, the team had to be better defensively, or they're going to have another playoff problem. And so, I just said to him, Steve, and he wanted so badly to win a cup. I mean, you're captain of a team, and you've got a good team for maybe 7 of the 10 years, because he got drafted in I think 83 or 84, 83, I guess. And then for the next 7 years, they were getting better all the time and getting Fedorov and Lidstrom and Konstantinov. And the team was ready, the team was ready to have a good run. So I said, Steve, we got to get you to play a lot different type of game, which will spill off on the other type of players, because he wasn't the only one that was good offensively. We had a lot of good offense. So, he wanted so badly to win a cup. And I said, you're not going to have the individual, you're not going to get the 50, 60 goals or 160 points one year. And sure enough, he got his 35, 40 goals. And by example, he became a penalty killer. He blocked shots. He really played through some tough injuries, and it spilled off on the entire team. And the biggest admiration, though, I could give to Steve Yzerman as a captain was we had a strong organization, and Kenny Holland was a wonderful general manager and still is. And he would go after free agents, and he didn't care if they were captains of other teams. I mean, guys like Chris Chelios and Brendan Shanahan and guys like that. So, he would bring them in to our team. We made trades. We got Wendell Clark one year. We got different kind of players, big name players. But, Steve never had a problem. It wasn't anybody trying to outdo anybody else. So whatever he did to keep those good top players as team players was important. And he was a very quiet individual, very competitive. What you see is not what you get. As soon as that game started at 7 or 7:30, he was in his zone. I mean, there was some nights he'd be so tough on the referees, and we'd have to quieten him down. I mean, he was in his zone for 2.5 hours, ultra competitive. And then, when he went to Tampa, I knew the owner, Jeff. I met Jeff Vinnick, and I didn't know he wanted Steve Yzerman, but he was after. I had lunch with Jeff one year just after he bought the team. He wanted to know if he should hire general manager that was in the wings, say waiting somewhere, that was second in command, or there was 2 or 3 that had been experienced guys. And I said, well, I can't tell you which one you want. He said, but he was a wonderful man, because he said, I'm not in a rush. I mean, I want to build a good team. And sure enough, he mentioned Steve Yzerman. He mentioned his name. I said, he's training under Ken Holland, and I said, he's like Mike Ilitch's another son. He's not leaving Detroit. I said, I'm positive he'll never leave Detroit. Well, sure enough, he did. And Steve, that organization is so strong now. I mean, he had a good man in Julian Griesbaugh, who's not the general manager, but they kept getting players. They get players. They draft players. They draft Russians in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th rounds. They draft free agents. They get free agents on their team, and they've built themselves a hang of a team. And Steve wanted to get back to Detroit, and he's got his hands, it's going to be a rebuild for sure. And tough loss, but they'll find a way. I guess he's got the 4th pick instead of the 1st, which is, I mean, if we don't know though, nobody knows the future, but there's too many hockey people feel that this young Lafreniere is a special number 1 pick. He's not there's been a lot of great number 1 picks, and there's some that haven't reached their full potential. But Tripp, I understand that he's been the player of the year 2 years in a row. He's been good in the international tournaments. Looks like he's one of those, we call them generation type players that come along every 5 or 6 or 10 years. And if he is, well, some good team is gonna some better team that maybe doesn't deserve him. We'll put it this way, it was tough for Detroit. But the Steve, he's a calm guy. He's not going to cry and complain, and I think he's at the stage where he's going to try to rebuild that team back, and it's going to take time.
That Lafreniere, okay, so he's a teenager with such a bright future, but Ronald Reagan, one of our great presidents, I always heard about Ronald Reagan. He would ask everybody their opinion. He'd have no problem delegating, knowing that he was the boss. He would ultimately make the decision. And since you and I have become close, I mean, you'll call me all the time and you'll say, Tripp, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? Now, I don't know if you just let it go in one ear and out the other, but that impresses me so much. Speaking of Lafreniere being a teenager, is there anything in your upbringing that created this? The fact that you will ask multiple people their opinion, knowing that you'll make the ultimate call. But I think that's a wonderful quality.
Well, I started as I was really fortunate. I was unfortunate maybe that I wasn't able to pursue a dream, but it was a tough dream because there's 6 teams in the league. I mean, whether you're going to play or not. But I started coaching when I was 19 or 20, and I was coaching the junior team, the junior B team, actually. It wasn't a high-profile team, but I got used to coaching players of my similar age. And then I got into a high-profile team, and I was really fortunate because the Canadians were in their heyday in the 60s and 50s, and I got to know the coach, the late Toe Blake, who I still feel when you look at 13 seasons and he wins 8 times out of 13. And he also was a Hall of Fame player. He was a wonderful man. And I was able to get close enough that I could meet him once a week and with a bunch of questions. I was always trying to figure out how am I going to get better? How can I mean, he's a guy that's been through it. He's got one of the best teams of all time. He won 5 in a row as a coach when he first started coaching Montreal. And they went dry for 3 or 4 years, and then he came back and he won 3 more. So I used to ask him a lot of questions, and sometimes he would not. He'd say, "Well, you better figure that out. My answer is not really what you maybe want." So I've always felt that the more information you can get, I mean, you eventually have to make your own decision. I understand that, but I was always inquisitive, and I think it maybe because I started coaching. When I started coaching, players would retire in the early 30s, and then they would take up coaching. That's how it maneuvered its way. Now, of course, coaches have access to clinics. I mean, I've been on a call now Monday, Wednesday, Friday since about the 2nd week of March, 3rd week right after we had the pause, and there's about 50 to 60, some young. You got Ken Hitchcock, you got Mike Babcock, you've got Rob Brindamore, you got the Jimmy Montgomery started it. You got a junior coach in Quebec that works the Zoom thing, and you got Barry Trotz. You got a lot of the NHL coaches, and then you have all the college people that are trying to get better. You got European coaches. It's a wonderful thing that the coaches are doing because they had a coach from Sweden on the national team coach the other day, and then they got Vinny Prospel, who's coaching in the Czech Republic, and they have great topics. They bring in people from other sports. So as a coach, they get an opportunity to, they can ask questions of people that have been through it. Ken Hitchcock, I mean, he's been around a long time. Barry Trotz, and they're very free with their information. They're not trying to hoard it. These are all most of the coaches on the call are ones that have come up the hard way. They didn't just quit hockey and jump in the NHL. They coach junior, they coach college. And there's some great college coaches that are participating, and I think it's great for the young coach fraternity. I mean, a young coach can get better now because there's clinics, there's drills they can pick up, and but you got to work. To me, that's fine to have all that information, but you better work to use it, and you better work when you get your chance. And it's like anything else. If you don't work, you're not gonna make it.
I don't know how many people have said on the bench, Scotty Bowman was always thinking 2 or 3 shifts ahead of what was going on at the current time. It's a different type of player. It's a different time. It's a different game in some significant ways since the last time you coached and lifted the cup. What was that? June of 2002. If somebody talked you off the mountaintop, I know it's not going to happen, but if somebody talked you off the mountaintop and you came back and coached again, what adjustments would you make in your approach and execution than the last time you were behind the bench in 2002?
Well, the way the game is played now with so much speed and short shifts is your tactic of getting the players on the ice the same as when I was coaching is so much different now, because if you continually try to match, the shifts are probably, they're in the 30 seconds range now. And when I was there, they were in maybe a minute and a half, maybe even longer when I first started. So I think you'd be better suited to not get hung up on who plays against who as much as you try to get your entire team playing a certain system. Because, when I started coaching, you'd have defensive players and you'd have offensive players, and you'd sort of mix them up and you'd coach your game accordingly. But now, as I see it, so you may get some great offensive players that have some deficiencies defensively, and you've just gotta. I think you got to work with them and explain to them how, because there's nothing magic about being a player. Everybody can't put the puck in the net. Everybody can't make plays like each other, but everybody can work hard and everybody can think a good game. And I think that's what a coach has to do. He's got to get his, if you've got a great offensive players and you can't mix them up now and try to harp on defense all the time. If they got a special skill, you got to reason with them, and you've got to you actually have to watch your game plan. But I don't think now you can match lines like I did, because you'd be changing on the fly all the time, and you'd be giving up puck possession. It's a different game, and I think I'd be more inclined. I look at the good teams now. And it's a team. You can have stars. You have to have stars, but at the same time, your secondary players are so crucial. They've always been crucial, even in the playoffs. I mean, your role players. I mean, they can decide games. They can come in when you get injuries. And I'm anxious to see now if there is a startup, and if it's going to be a startup, it's probably not going to be till probably near August. And you think that the team's finished in March. It's going to be a real test of endurance. And I don't know how many. I know that the teams are talking about getting 28 skaters and maybe 3 or 4 goalies training for the next 3 weeks whenever they're going to start, if they do start in July for the next phase. But the players that you're going to need players. You're going to need players that because you're going to get injuries, you're going to get sickness, and I think the teams that have the depth and are going to control it are going to. I mean, if they do come back, will have success.
Okay, so unique circumstance. I know how fluid the situation is, but let's say everything goes off without a hitch, starting with training camp in July 10th, knowing that the team that wins is going to be in a hotel, quarantine. Yeah, so. If you were coaching one of these 24 teams right now, both in terms of what you're trying to get out of training camp and then in that hotel trying to get your team to play with the more desperation than anybody, what would be in your mind of your points of emphasis right from day one of training camp, hopefully resulting in hoisting the Stanley Cup a couple months later?
Sell the team game completely. Make sure all your 28 players feel a part of your team. you're not gonna have a lot of preseason games, but make sure that your entire team is got to be relying on each other, because I mean that's what they're saying now. Even talking about the infections that people can get, is that the not that I'm a scientist or I just follow the leader and what I know, what I read. People that wear masks, we're trying to prevent. We're not only now they're even saying yes, it can help yourself, but it also can contain what other people might have. And I think that's what I would be trying to push on the team. Is the most important is going to be, there's not a player in those 28 or 30 that are going to be ended up on the roster that is not going to maybe have to do an important part, and try and get away from the individual, because we're going to be 4 months before we play a game. If you think about it, April, May, June, July, 4 months, it's a long time.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple of off-topic, but not really, off-topic questions before I let you go, partner. In all of your years, you've, I'm sure, talked to many other coaches, successful people in other sports and business. With your championships, you visited the White House on numerous occasions. If you were to pick one person, a coach in another sport, somebody successful in another facet of life, off the top of your head, that really made a particularly good impression on you, who would that person be?
Well, I got to know a lot of the top coaches in other sports, but not as I mean, I got pretty friendly with Joe Torre because he played in St. Louis when I was there, and then I was a big supporter of when he was with the Yankees. They used to train down in Tampa when I was in Sarasota. But I go back even further, and the two coaches that I mean, I have a lot of admiration for anybody that coaches at a big league level. But when I think about Al Arbor with the Islanders, who played for me, was a captain of our team in the St. Louis, was so successful with the Islanders, and I compare him so much with Don Shula, the late Don Shula. They were with a team. I know how hard it is to be with a team half a dozen years, and they were with a team 20 years. And that's a wonderful thing and they had success. It wasn't like they were just hanging on to the job. For the most part, these guys, and of course, in recent, I've only met them once, but in recent times, the job, and the jury's going to be out again every year when you're a coach. Bill Belichick with the Patriots. I mean, to have a long-standing scheme with him, with the way they change players too. But I thought Don Shula with Miami and Al Arbor with the Islanders, one in hockey and one in football, would be people that I did get to meet Don. Actually, I got to meet him a few times, but I got more familiar with his son, Mike Shanahan. Because I watched him. He was with a couple other. He was with Chicago Bears when they had Tony Wise and Mike Shanahan, and anyway, they went together with Jimmy Johnson in Dallas. So I got to know them just hanging around and meeting them. But I go back to Shula and Al Arbor.
You remember at any point, whether it be live or whether it be on television, another sport or another player, that you looked at your screen, or if you were in attendance and you said, wow, this is marvelous. This really impresses me.
Well, I mean, I have to go back a long time, but I go back to, I was always interested in baseball, and I grew up in Montreal, and we had always the Brooklyn Dodger players, and then later it was Los Angeles Dodgers. But and then I moved to here 40 years ago, and of course in Western New York, it's all about the Yankees. But I had a special feeling in watching Tiger Woods play golf. I was lucky. I became a scorekeeper back in 1995. It's 25 years ago. So I was a walking scorekeeper, And what I saw what Tiger Woods did in 2000 at Pebble Beach in the U.S. Open, when he won by 15 shots, then he just about duplicated because I went to the British Open 2 weeks later, and he played. I scored 2 of the 4 days, but I mean, the man kept wanting me to do the last, and I done it. It's quite a thrill to walk in the last group of players, and I watched him play at St Andrews in 2000, and he played a flawless game again, and he never got in a bunker in 4 days. Never, and there's tons of them. I mean, if you ever play golf over there, Tripp, but Tiger Woods in the game he played in the 4 days, but I scored the last game when he played with Ernie Els, and I couldn't believe how methodical he was. I think he started with an 8 or 9 stroke lead, and all he did is the first 7 holes just make sure I do par, and then Ernie got a bogey on number 8, and then when he got the lead about 10 or 11, then he started getting birdies. But that would be the most outstanding event I've ever been able to be close to, being a walking scorekeeper and watching Tiger Woods in that era. It was 2000, 2 weeks apart, Pebble Beach and St Andrews.
Whether it be during those events, I'm sure his focus was beyond razor sharp, or not during those events. Have you ever had any notable conversations with Tiger?
No, but we went into the scoring trailer after, and there was a lady helping out with myself. She was from California Golf Association. She dearly wanted to get his autograph, and I had been walking score the whole 18 holes, and we got into the trailer. They were waiting for something on TV. She gave, and Ernie Els was sitting in front of her, and I was sitting behind Tiger. She was across from me. She gave the scorecard to Ernie Els to sign, and he signed it, and he gave it to Tiger, and Tiger signed it, but he knew somebody was behind him. And so he turned around, and I had met him the Christmas before at a big dinner in New York for honoring the coaches and players of the 20th century. And he turned around, and he saw me had him a name tag, and he said, "Scotty, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Tiger, I was walking scorekeeper the entire 18 holes." But see, that's with concentration. He didn't no gazing. The only time on the last hole at Pebble, par 5, when he got on the green, he was only leading by about 14, but he never went near the crowd. He's concentrating on his next shot. And when he got on the green in regulation, it was a par 5, he got his 3rd shot on the green. And then he finally went by the crowd. But there's no spectating when he's there. And that was in his prime, He was totally, just he and his caddy at the time was Steve Williams. And then actually, Steve Williams came in the trailer and kind of, he didn't know who we were. And he said, "Oh, by the way, Tiger, don't be bothering him signing." So the poor lady she was so down, but she was pretty smart. She gave the scorecard to Ernie Els, and he gave it to Tiger. And then Tiger, after he saw it was me, of course, he had his little bag there, and he reached in and he gave a ball to the lady, and he gave a ball to myself. But no, that was a cute story. That concentration beyond belief. Yeah.
I had one more golf question, because there I am enjoying a Sunday years ago. Was it 2000? What? I think it was 2000. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. I turn on the TV. Jack Nicklaus is playing 18 for the last time, and I look at him on the bridge, and I'm like, "Well, there's my man Scotty." Tell me about
2005.
that. Yeah,
it was 2005, and that was another time. That was his last game, and he was on a Friday. He missed the cut, but he knew he wasn't going to make it. But he played St Andrews, and he had one. He did get in one bunker on the back 9 around 15, I think it was. He had to go out sideways. He got his first 17 holes. He had 16 pars and 1 bogey, and then on 18, he made a miraculous shot and made a long putt for a birdie. So he played par in his last game at St Andrews, and he played with Tom Watson and the young player from England. Well, he wasn't too long at that time, but I don't remember his name right now. He was an English guy, but it was wonderful. I mean, that's the best golf you could ever get. See those guys play.
What? Just a follow up, because you got to know Jack decently, either that week or any other interaction with Jack. What do you remember most about your time with him?
Well, he's a very quiet man, and he was that game he played there. He was. I'd like to remember the guy's name that he played with, because he was a young player.
Luke Donald.
Luke Donald. He went to Northwestern. That's right. And he told Luke Donald. He said, "I want to give you some advice. You got all the shots you need. I'm going to stress with you. You got to have patience." He gave him a little bit of a talk, and I was listening to him. But he's a very friendly man, and he said, "Don't be too far ahead of your game." But he said that's in 2005. Yeah.
I'm very grateful that you, Scotty, have given me the occasional one of those talks over the years, and I can't thank you enough for doing this. But as the 4th of July is coming this weekend, I think it was my dad's second to last, or it might have been his last 4th of July. I called you the morning of, and you said, "Tripp, you got to make him some ribs." You said, "Yeah." And I can't say the ribs were any good, but I'll never forget that, because you told me there are a couple of places you like to get ribs in Detroit. I made them from scratch.
Gianopoulos. Yeah, he's not there anymore. That's right. He's related to Johnny and Peter Gianopoulos, ran a great store. They have a relative that's in near. I think it's near Dayton. No, is it near Cincinnati? Montgomery Ribs. If you ever go to Cincinnati, but we just made it, Tripp, because they just give me a notice on my iPad. I'm down to my last 3%, but we made it.
Well, the talkaholic that I am, I'll do that to you. It's okay. I'm so grateful because my life is infinitely better with you as a friend, but you've taught me so much about the game, and I can't wait for you to teach me more. Thanks for doing this, partner.
Okay, we hope to see you soon.
Love you. Just want to remind everybody to rate and review the podcast and share with your friends, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Dig In Tripp. Thank you to the greatest coach of all time and an even better person, Scotty Bowman.